Fantastic. Okay, so first of all, welcome everyone. My name is Felipe. I am the program lead here for the Macquarie Incubator. I will be your host today with Sarah, and we have our amazing guest, Robert. Welcome back to the week 3 of our Inspiring Social Entrepreneur Speaker Series. So before we get started, I'd like to play a quick video to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. So I'll just share that with you pretty quick, and then I'll hand over to Sarah so she introduces Robert. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping before we start. So Robert is going to run the presentation today. Feel free to pop your questions through the chat. We'll cover them at the end. And if you have any doubts or need any information, just message me directly. All right.
Welcome. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Macquarie University land, the Wadamaragal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We welcome people of all nations and all faiths. Kwai Bidja, Jamna Payala Janawi. Come here, we speak together. We have 60,000 years of archaeological evidence of Aboriginal habitation at Lake Mungo and 20,000 years in Ryde. We have great antiquity. Today, hundreds of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduate from Macquarie University. The Darug Nation had famous leaders such as Chief Yarramundi, Naraginji, Colby and Maria Locke. Many of the descendants of these Darug people live today amongst you. We celebrate with you our ongoing attachment and custodianship of this country. We celebrate the achievements of Macquarie University.
I don't know about you, but I think this video is very inspiring. So as I said, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to the elders of past, present, and emerging. So very quickly, I know you all heard about the Incubator before. Dee has just put on the chat the link to our newsletter. So we're based here out of Macquarie University, and we're nurturing communities and creating programs to encourage innovation. So if, regardless of the group you're in, if you're a student, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're just curious about it, if you're a researcher, there's something here for you. And we've been super busy getting programs like this amazing program that you're in today to help you, progress even further, or use innovation as a tool to inspire or get your projects, out of the paper and bring them to life. So definitely check it out. But today it's all about our amazing guest, Robert, and I might hand over to Sarah from the Social Impact Hub so she can introduce him. Sarah,
Okay.
over to you.
Thanks, Felipe, and welcome everyone. And I'm delighted to introduce our third inspiring entrepreneur to speak to you. Another story about food you'll be pleased to hear, but this time it's Robert Pekin, who is the CEO of Food Connect. Robert is a former organic dairy farmer and market gardener and social entrepreneur who has an interest in changing the way the current food system works. So he is going to tell you how he is trying to do that. He founded Food Connect in 2004, which is a multi-farmer food distribution enterprise. And I will hand over to him now so he can tell you all about that. So over to you, Robert.
Thanks so much, and look, wonderful to, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. Wonderful to be able to share with you part of my story and what we're up to at the moment, and hopefully that can give you some insights into what you're all trying to do. It's a really important time, as you're probably all no doubt aware, and in particular, I'd like to pay my respects because I'm on Turrbal and Yagara country up here in Brisbane. Turrbal on the north side of the river, and Yagara on this side of the river. And I don't know if you've been watching some of the NITV or the stuff, Cookie, Looky, Here Comes Cookie, some of the amazing programs that are really, I suppose, elevating and changing our views of what Indigenous wisdom, the way they farmed, the way they lived, the way they governed, so sophisticated. So we've got a lot to learn from them. And I'll touch on that part of our journey as I go through this presentation. So I'll just share my screen. Here we go. There it is there. Righto. I better find my screen now. There we go. Oh, there we go. Cool. So can everyone see that? Does that come up well?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Great. And I'll just reduce my screen so I can see the top. Cool. So, yeah, so as I was introduced, this is a bit of a story about how my early years, I was born in 1963. So I'm, nearly up in the 60s now, but I consider myself to still be, 35 to 40 years old, still pretty bulletproof, still up to mischief, and still not taking no for an answer. And probably, if anything, I want to leave you with today is one of the aspects of how I've managed to create change is through by being up to mischief, making it fun. Don't get too serious about it. It is serious what we're trying to do, but you've got to take the seriousness out of it and just approach it as a long-term project where you just don't know really what's going to be around the corner. So not having expectations, but having a dream and moving it with you is one of the biggest lessons I've learned. So you're basically born and bred dairy farm down in Western Victoria. In the heady cooperative days, there was quite a few cooperatives when I was growing up, a lot of farmers on my road, all growing different things, tomatoes, carrots, peas, onions, just an amazing array of produce was grown in my neck of the woods. But by the time I was 17 and left home, because I'm the oldest of 9 kids, the landscape was starting to diminish a bit in terms of not only the diversity, but the number of farmers. And by the time I'd come back 13 years later to share farm with mum and dad, it had changed fundamentally. So this is, 80s through to the mid or early 90s. So I got caught up in that first wave of dairy deregulation. It wasn't happening when I was share farming with mum and dad, but pretty much after I bought the farm off mum and dad, 2 months later, I had a 20% downcast in the opening milk prices for the next financial year, which certainly didn't match with my forecasting. I bought the farm at a pretty high rate because I had to pay out 9 or 8 other siblings. I had to make sure that their inheritance was intact, but stubbornly went on with that journey. But unfortunately, after 3 years of more downward prices and all, but also drought and rising costs to do with dairy farming, I'd gone a little bit mad. Was certified by a psychologist to basically pack my bags and was left with nothing. No farm, 90 grand in debt, nowhere to live. Completely everything was taken away from me, and there was no cracks in those days for there was no welfare system for farmers back in those days. So I had to basically I was homeless for quite a period of time. I managed to make my way across to Tasmania, and a long story, but through a couple of coincidences, particularly with the Indigenous people, I had to get over myself pretty quickly, lick my wounds, realise it was just spilt milk in the context of what the rest of the world was going through, and be a part of the solution and not be a burden, both to myself and all my friends and others. So that was where I started to really focus on, well, if I'm going to be a part of the solution, what does that look like? So as I'll just click through the slides just to see, oh, hang on, that didn't work. There must be an arrow. So basically, this was what come to me in those years in the bush in Tasmania when I was pretty downcast. Fortunate thing was I had about 15 kilo of books that I hadn't read as a dairy farmer, very philosophical books, so Walden. A lot of the books that probably, you know, we're being encouraged to read right at this point in time. Buckminster Fuller, Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. Just an incredible array of books that I never had the time to read as a farmer. I sunk my teeth into, and I realised that if I was to do anything, because farmers were the frog in that slowly melting pot that was gradually reaching boiling point. It was evidence everywhere of me being a farmer. There was other farmers committing suicide. It wasn't just my issue. It was a global issue. And I thought, well, I need to look at a solution that radically reshaped how food and agriculture could be done. Through reading those books, I come up with three fundamental things that basically, one, food is a basic human right. It should not be a part of the commodity market for that simple reason, that the market is a very blunt and useless instrument for determining the price of food because we have what we have today, as most of you know, and probably previous speakers have spoken about, is we have a issue where there's plenty of food, there's enough food on the planet to feed about 11 billion people. It's just the distribution is where the rot is. At that point in time, I didn't know it, but I become a system disruptor because I didn't want to participate in the market with a very, very different model of farmers being price makers and ecological pricing being applied to how we value the price of the produce. It wasn't about market disruption. It was about disrupting the whole system. I was also very interested in all the wicked problems, and you've probably been, the wicked problems have been explained to you. So these are the things like obesity is a wicked problem, poverty is a wicked problem, problems that charities alone can't fix. I also, reading through Schumacher's and so many human scale, lots and lots of books, that big, and me being a farmer who was milking 300 cows, was looking at milking 500 cows, looking at milking 1,000 cows when I was when I went back to mum and dad's farm. I saw behind those big farms and the devastation, not just to the farmer and the family, but to all the animals and the crops and the landscape. And we know that big business is just a very, from a systems point of view, big is just a big part of the problem, to be fairly blunt. Big corporations, as we know in Australia, with Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, they are completely incompetent, and we've seen them go through courts many, many times for so many things, whether they're not paying people enough or not paying farmers enough. They've been into court, they've been held guilty, but to them, they just see it as that's a part of doing business. So we know that big, for all sorts of reasons, and I've just named a couple of them, are not the solution. So I wanted a business that went deep and wide. And it wasn't just me, it was a network effect. I wanted to also look at the root cause, and me being a farmer, and a farmer that went down the organic pathway, looking at the root cause of, say, you know, why aren't there enough earthworms in the soil on my farm when I took over from my dad, is, you know, it's a pretty natural thing for a farmer to think of root causes. You know, you don't have to go far back to, you know, it doesn't take much thinking for anyone to identify the root cause. It had to be place-based, it had to be embedded in the community, because I come out of a community when I was a growing boy where all those farmers worked together. Footy clubs were vibrant, dance clubs were vibrant, communities were vibrant, the economic multipliers were in place because people had a respectful tension between accountability and responsibility. If you've got a company if you're buying something off a company who's in another part of the planet, who's pouring poisons into that creek, there's no accountability in that system. So it has to be place-based. It has to be where you can be downstream of the impacts of something you're invested in. And at the same time, you need to be upstream, if you're running a business, upstream of the people you're meant to be looking after. If you're not upstream of them and you haven't got that feedback loop coming back to you that holds you accountable, then we've lost the whole point of why being in business. And the other thing which really was confusing for a while is, and in the food system in particular, we've seen all sorts of great campaigns to divest from fossil fuels, coal being a big one. Obviously military, military industrial complex, divest from that. But food is something that people saw as too complicated. And I like to draw a distinction between, it's just humans that make it complicated. It's complex, yes, but you don't have to, if you couch it in the terms of thinking of making it complicated because our head makes it all complicated, then you're losing, then you lose focus. Whereas if you see it as everything is complex, but from a systems point of view, you can make sense of that complexity and go, okay, it's complex, and we need to have parallel streams of things happening. So you have an interdisciplinary approach to solving something or other, rather than when people see it as a complicated problem or scenario, they then go down very narrow channels because they don't want to. They want to try and, I suppose, remove some of the complication, and therein lies the problem. You're then not thinking systemically, and some of the things that you're doing has a negative ripple effect. And we see that, in so many places around the world in the current way of thinking. So I'm just I'm just moving on to the next slide. In my naivety, particularly when I was running the dairy farm and getting bigger, the common thing that was spoken to us was agribusiness, agri-finance, agri-chemicals. Everything was using this word agri-something. And what I realised was that the culture was the missing piece. There's a great joke that I could tell you that describes this, but basically I narrowed it down to that culture was the missing piece. And if we were to create a system disruptor, we needed to bring on board the culture aspect and bring people as participants into the food system, rather than letting them sit at home and passively getting, a box of organic food. So there was a whole bunch of things that I deliberately disrupted, even though I was an organic dairy farmer and then a biodynamic market gardener. As much as I love all of those farmers, and particularly the early farmers who pioneered that and become ostracized as a result, it was still dividing and conquering. It wasn't creating a culture where all good farmers could see themselves as one, delivering to a whole bunch of customers who really deserved that really good food, and then allowing their gift, their beauty as a farmer to unfold autonomously about how they wanted to farm, rather than saying, no, you need to be certified this or certified that, or you need to have, whatever else you could think of. And there's many things you could think of in terms of today of saying, filtering in or out farmers. I just wanted to filter good farmers in, and that was it. I also was, obviously, we needed affordability built into our system, but the current and the mantra still is, with Coles and Woolies is still cheap. It's still about a ridiculous, the dollar a litre of milk, where we pay more for a dollar for a litre of water is just a ludicrous scenario. And then as it says there, it's highly centralised. I mean, this statistic, they've gone from 67 distribution centres around Australia now down to 16 from 2007 to 2017. This is misuse of power, and obviously, as we've seen through the crisis, causes log jams and causes choke points, and completely incapable of feeding the Australian population through 16 distribution centres. And so we're seeing the cracks. And obviously the other thing with business, as we all know now, is that they externalise the costs. They're not internalising all of those costs, the health costs, the greenhouse gas emissions, all of those other things. And agriculture is the largest contributor. You know, it's 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions, food and agriculture. It's 70% of our freshwater issues. It's got so many issues to do with it. And at the moment, the current industrialised food system just externalises those things and doesn't incorporate them into the cost of the food. And the last point down there, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's an exciting research project, I suppose, that's been going on for 5 or 6 years now, called The Invisible Farmer. If you're a woman and you want to, or if you're a man, you should go and have a look at this. The stuff that they're pulling out about women's role. You know, if I was to state one figure to you, 80% of Australian farms rely on the wife having off-farm income to keep that farm viable. So that means every time you walk into a supermarket, you're basically keeping your propagate. Or I'm losing my words today. It's been a big day. So you're prolonging that issue by going into Coles and Woolies and buying something cheap. So if we're to have more women on farms, and you know, globally, and I noticed when I expanded the screenshot of everyone, there's quite a few people from all around the world. You know, I think it's 76% of women still farm in the third world. They still provide the food, and we need more of that in the Western world. So, you know, what are we infamous for? There's an old saying that common sense isn't very common these days. And, you know, through my 16 years in running Food Connect, it really is tricky sometimes to get people to think with their common sense, to get rid of all of the stuff that they've been told to think, and think at a systems level. That's all common sense is. It's just thinking at a systems level, you know. As I said before, we've got to be radical. We've got to be cheeky. We've got to make it fun. We've got to give farmers hope. So this is one of the unintended consequences. I was thinking it was more about price, but not long into the early years of Food Connect, a lot of farmers come to me and said, the biggest thing you've given us is hope, because we're being acknowledged. We're being congratulated, we're being thanked. So we did a lot of farm tours in the early days. You've got to create new markets, and that's, you know, that was one of the first things when I set up Food Connect. It was the first time ever done in Australia, but I was asking people to pay 4 weeks in advance for a box of seasonal produce, and they had to pick it up via someone they didn't know in their community. So there were 3 things. So we were creating a whole new different way people did food, and I think in us creating that new market, we opened up so many opportunities for people to participate in the system. It's very, very, very much about community and relationships more than it is about the transaction. And there's a whole bunch of things, particularly in the early years when I set up Food Connect, I was pretty brutally uncompromising. And you probably gather by the tone of my voice when I start to talk about these things, you know, I get a bit pissed off with the lack of will, the lack of incompetence, the incompetence of some of these large businesses that could do so much if they realised what power they have and how they could use that power in a completely different way, and not some sort of, you know, oh yes, we'll send a bit of money over there to some food rescue thing, and that'll make us look pretty. That to me is just it just slaps of not only ignorance, but it slaps of they don't care. They don't care. So so I'm pretty tough on people about, if you want to work with us, you need to lose a whole bunch of your sort of you know, your you need to just, you know, think about things a bit differently, and get a bit make a stand. Basically, that's what I'm saying there. Just make a stand. Whatever it is you do, make a stand. Just go to the next slide. So in 2017, so our whole emphasis was how do we solve this conundrum between paying farmers fairly and making the food affordably so people, disadvantaged groups of people, could access that really highly nutritious food that was coming from local. So that was our impact side of things. On the customer end, on the eater end. On the farmer end, obviously, we were paying the farmers fairly well, but if we were going to shake up the food system, we need to have a price point that actually really did something about it. And I felt there was room enough there in the middle for us. But what I found out was our makers, the ones who were making cheese and sauerkraut and all those sort of things, they were struggling at how to have a price point that made their business viable, where they could pay us, because they were buying a raw product of us, pay that price, but also make it reasonably affordable so people could eat that sauerkraut. And we come to the conclusion that the overheads were the big challenge. They were all renting in different suburbs out and about the place. Forklift, printer, all those costs. So we got together a bunch of makers back in 2015, and we said, let's find a place where we could all be under the one roof together and share. Instead of there was 15 businesses at the time. Instead of 15 forklifts, we just had one or two. Instead of 15 printers, we have one or two. And you get the idea. We had a commercial kitchen at the time in this shed, or two commercial kitchens in this shed, which we were using ourselves to use the food that was waste, or what you would normally call waste, and value adding that, and obviously having a lot of events where we could cook up all that produce and do workshops, teach people how to use the leftover lettuce leaves, the leftover cabbage leaves, to use the stem of broccoli, all sorts of things you can do in that space. But so we approached the landlord. He at first said, we just ticked over paying him $1 million in rent. And I said, I don't want to be, to Emma, my partner, I said, I don't want to be here in 10 years' time, having just paid over another $1 million to our landlord. So we went and approached him, and he said, I'm happy getting your $1 million, and no, you can't buy the warehouse. And I thought, oh God. I had asked him a couple of times previously, and he'd given me the same answer, not in so blunt terms. So I thought, well, stuff it. I'm going to go and find another place, and started on that journey. And about 3 weeks later, the landlord called me in and sat me down, and he said, "I'd be a fool if I didn't sell to you." And I said, "Well, name your price now," because that's right. Because he said to me, "But I can't sell it to you now because I know you got no money. I'll give you." I think it was at that point in time. It was a year. He gave us a year to buy the building. So I said, "Beauty, name your price," and he named the price, 1.8 million. And so we, about 4 or 5 months later, the equity crowdfunding bill changed, or legislation passed, and we learned of equity crowdfunding. We'd had a couple of impact investors approach us about buying the warehouse, the whole warehouse, but we, in typical fashion, we turned that down and said, well, that's not shifting a dial. 4 white men as opposed to 1 white man, what's the difference there? So we thought, well, we've been all about community all our lives. Let's embark on this campaign to have the community own the warehouse with us. And so we embarked on an equity crowdfunding campaign, and you can see the time frame there. It was not easy, but it was a hell of a lot of fun. And in the end, we were successful. And it's at that point in time, it was a bit of a high watermark, not just for food enterprises, but also for social enterprises, in terms of, the hope that it gave people that there was a crowd out there that was willing to invest equity into businesses. And now that's becoming more and more popular, as you're probably all no doubt aware. Is any question? I should probably just park there. Is there any questions? I'll just go back, actually. Any questions so far? Does anyone? I don't think I've got.
Actually, I got one question here on the chat, Robert, if that's okay.
Yep.
So, Food Connect should be perceived as a tech or agricultural startup, or something else. And do you want more to innovate or disrupt the field?
Yeah, no, really good question. So, so our theory of change back then, this is when theory of change wasn't this, quite a long process. It was just, our theory of change back then was we will change the food system by participation. So instead of us getting bigger, we would always encourage other businesses to join us and network with us and be a part of the family, and they could unfold their entrepreneurial gift. So that was our theory of change. So we replicated Food Connect in 2010 and 2009, 10, 11 in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, and a few other regional centres. And the tech, because we invented our own technology, we'd made our own technology, we probably put at that stage, $400,000 into the technology solution. The replications, and it was sort of a cookie cutter model. It wasn't intended to be, but it ended up becoming a cookie cutter. All those replications were demanding so much of us on the technology space. We had to make a decision, and we decided that I wanted to just be in food distribution. I wasn't technology orientated. And fortunately, two of my really good friends who just toured the US after being very, very dissatisfied with being in government in Victoria, they just come back from the US and they said, we're pretty excited. We just looked at all these food hubs and food things going on in the US. Do you mind if we take on the technology side of things? Because they had a bit of tech. And so we just gifted it to them, the whole thing, and they went off, and now it's become a global software solution that we use ourselves called Open Food Network. And it's now global, and it's a pretty amazing thing. So, that flies in the face of, because if we had have gone with that and kept that ourselves, we would have had those, well, who knows? So it's not even worth talking about. But our theory of change was to always, I called it mutate back in those days, not a great word, but every time we get to a point where you go, oh, this looks like too much and we're starting to get too big, we just mutate and find someone, and always encouraging our staff, all our farmers, to think more entrepreneurial, to think more diverse, to think about opportunities for everyone who either works for them or they know. So that's, I hope, did that answer the question?
That was from Rosario. I think, in my opinion, it did answer, but Rosario, feel free to speak up if you have any other questions, or just pop through the chat.
Yeah, no, I found the explanation exhausting. Also, the conclusion, as I perceive it, is that you posit yourself in the market as an intermediate. We can say this.
Yeah, it's like an invisible facilitator was how I originally perceived it, Rosario. But as it turned out, we become an intermediary, more and more an intermediary as time went on. But we're now extracting ourselves from that intermediary position. So we're sort of basically putting ourselves back in as a facilitator. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, because obviously visibility is really important and people like to see a brand. Even though we're not about branding per se, we're really post-brand or anti-branding in that context. But we're sort of in this sometimes uncomfortable but necessary space of being an intermediary, a middleman. There, I said it.
An invisible one, though.
Not very at the moment with all these landline and ABC documentaries shooting about. So, any other questions there, or should I continue?
I'm sure there will be more questions, but we can cover them at the end if you're okay.
Right, okay, cool. So, I'll move straight on to some of the impacts. I've mentioned some of these, but the biggest, and it's not really well known these days, because Australian. Hang on, I think I'll just turn my volume off. Australia isn't that good at measuring the economic multipliers from some of these things. We're getting better at it, but in the US, because particularly on food, every state, because they have a tax system, the states have a tax system, whereas Australia has a national system. So it's really hard to quantify the multiplier effect of buying locally. But there's a lot of evidence now that the economic multipliers through having a place-based enterprise that has impact sometimes between like a 2 to 4 times multiplier. And there's plenty of research around the world around that. Obviously, from a farmer's point of view, we're a very different business in terms of we're always saying to our farmers, you can build your confidence through us if you want to reach the market direct and become a CSA or a direct, or sell through restaurants, or even have your own box system. So we're always saying to our farmers, go and unfold and be who you want to be as a business. So that's a tremendous game changer when a farmer, because we're wanting to take away this scarcity mentality, and probably a lot of you will appreciate this, that Western society is built on scarcity mentality. And me being a farmer, an ex-farmer, I was buried in this scarcity mentality, particularly being a Catholic dairy farmer from Western Victoria. Like, we're the lowest run in farmer hierarchies. With graziers at the top and sheep, wool, and then down to cattlemen and all those sort of things. Dairy farmers are pretty low. So we didn't have much of an opinion, a very high opinion of ourselves. And veggie farmers aren't far away from that as well, fruit and veggie farmers. And they've been trained to be competitive, to not share, to keep their secrets to themselves, to not share what price they were getting, all of those sort of things. So the multi-farmer model, which I positioned in the Australian context around a whole bunch of iconic Australian cultural contexts. We're a penal colony. The way, the word mate comes from the fact that we're all called inmate such and such a number. We were never, as prisoners, we were never referred to by our name. And there's a whole bunch of things that come out of that still lives with us 250 years later. It's amazing how long, or how that some of these facets of our psychology are still in our DNA. The emissions thing I've spoken about, there's plenty of evidence out there. The employment multiplier now, we've just had some recent research that Food Connect per dollar retail compared to Coles employs 4 times more people and pays them $10,000 per employee more, which is just astounding. And then indirectly, with our farmers, our makers, we're a 10 times multiplier than Coles or Woolies. So it's an incredible employment impact. The health impacts stand for themselves. You eat, most of the food out there that's grown and sold by the supermarkets is pretty much got no nutrition, or is actually detrimental from a nutritional point of view because of the distance it comes and the amount of processing. Actually, if you went into a supermarket, 90% of the shelves are full of stuff that actually makes you unhealthy. Yield, this was a biggie to me, because I knew as a reasonably small market garden, well, I was very small, I was only on 6 acres, I was producing, and I was very, very new at market gardening, growing veggies. I had a bit of an inkling that I grew a bit more. And then when I started to involve myself with the farmers up here, like our lychee grower grows something like 15 times the amount of lychees per tree than some of the big commercial lychee growers up north. And it's all because of their care and attention, what I call eyes per acre. You have more eyes per acre, you just have far better yields because you've got so much awareness of that particular tree. You're looking after that tree, or those 40, 50, 60 trees. And obviously the increase in biodiversity by having farmers being more diverse is a bit of a no-brainer. And then lately we've got into this whole First Nations economic participation and governance. And it's a beautiful thing. It's so profound. It's changed even how we, in the Food Connect shed, how we structure our leases. Because as we know, Western world is built on power and control, and that's how it operates. Whereas First Nations, there is no such thing as control. It's about balance. There is no such thing as power. There's no such thing as a hierarchy. And so as soon as someone signs a lease with you, that means they're giving away their power to you. So we've changed the way we write our leases. And it's been, you know, it's one of these things that's really hard to measure. But if you're interested, look up some of Mary Graham's work or Aunt Lilla Watson's work. There's so much stuff coming out about just the profound impact their wisdom and thinking and ways of being is you know, I mean, if you want to get ahead in the game and have really deep impact, our First Nations people are the ones you need to be speaking to. But please don't co-opt it and don't colonise it. Just go in there and have a conversation and figure out some way of having economic participation, economic reconciliation. Don't go and buy bush food and then sell it for a fortune. You know, you're just repeating and perpetuating the problem. So this is our latest goal. I'm just going to quickly look at the time just to see. Oh, yep. So I'm at that point. So I'm on my second last slide, I think. So this is where we're at the moment, and why I'm in the Scaling Impact program with Jess and Kate and Jess and those guys is we're on a mission. We now, and particularly through COVID, we've seen so many cracks in the other system open up, and there's cracks open up, but there's so many opportunities now for our agriculture to face inward and look at the domestic market in a much more profound way. So we think food sheds are a big part of that solution because we have a model that basically aggregates, value adds, markets, and surrounds that whole region with an ecosystem similar to like a parent. You know, like the expectation in the Western world is that mum and dad, well, you've got to raise the kids all on your own. Whereas in fact, it takes the village. You know, it should be up to the aunties, uncles, your friends, that community to raise a child. So we see the same thing, that it's going to take the whole of a region to actually grow the food system in a much more profound and impactful way. The replication has to reflect what that region needs. Each region has got specific and unique things going on. It also has very unique people in that community, and we certainly don't want to have a model that goes in there and rides over the top of the value that's already in that community. We just see our model as being something that can inspire, and through obviously our experience, we can give them some knowledge on how to actually do things that elevates what potential is already in that region, and it responds to their priorities. It has to be at least 50% community owned, as the food shed here. It's a beautiful balanced mix. 50% impact investors, 50% in terms of value, 50% ownership by the community. It's a lovely symmetrical nice balance in having in that investment mix. And then I was going to go into regional food mapping, which is quite a complex thing. But it is easy to understand when you think about a region it'll have like food mapping, for instance, is you just determine how many chickens are eaten here in this region. And then you go, well, where do those chickens come from? Or how much turmeric is there, or whatever it is. Pick any crop and then say, where's it come from? And therein lies the opportunity to go, oh my God, you know, we're getting bloody, you know, garlic from such and such a place. Well, why don't we have some garlic farmers here? And it also looks at the latent infrastructure that's lying around, and there's plenty of it in the regions. And you go, okay, there's a piece of latent infrastructure over there. What can we do with that? What can we, how can we upcycle that building to, as another, to match an opportunity going around? There's a whole bunch of, it's beautiful. It's, I was going to say beautiful, the word beautiful again, but it's pretty inspiring and exciting stuff when you start to look at regions from an asset, from everything is an asset. Even their barriers are an asset. They're an opportunity waiting to be unleashed and unfolded. There weren't meant to be, that's why it's a bit late. There's meant to be more slides there. So, so this is the rule 1, maximise local ownership. And I can send these later on. I know we're running short of time. Rule 2, maximise local diversity. So, really look at an ecosystem approach. Don't go like Colac did in Western Victoria, where all ended up dairy farmers and it become boring. And then the supermarkets, the system had us by the short and curlies, and we had nowhere else to sell. And that was, and they know that. These big, powerful institutions in the food system, they know that, and they will exploit whatever opportunities they have. Rule 3, spreading triple bottom line business. So share your business idea. Everyone has is an entrepreneur at heart, whether it's an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur at heart. So it's about social entrepreneurialism rather than social enterprises. It's really about unleashing, even within your own business, you have a whole bunch of social entrepreneurs, and get them to think about that. We have our box curation team. They sell that to the sales team, and the sales team say, yes, this was an amazing job, or no, we're not going to pay you as a team what we think, because last week there was this error, this error, this error. When you get into a wage mentality, you're going back to slavery, and that is not emancipating the human being to be who they truly want to be. So this is key to it. And then the last one, rule 4, is develop this ecosystem that, in the metaphor I used before about parents not having to be the ones who raise the child wholly, it's up to the whole community. So you engage people, and it's, I can explain it to you this way. When you share your dream with someone, and they share that dream back to me, it's almost they're giving you permission now, or you actually now, after a couple of sessions, want to provide that person, you sort of funnel things towards them so they can have their dream. Whereas at the moment in Western society, it's up to me, and I've got to keep it tight, and I've got to keep it private, and I'm going to share it. I'm going to, and I've got to do all of this work. Whereas when you share, say there's 5 people, you've got 4 people now who are going to work for your dream. Now, 4 versus 1, it's a pretty simple solution. So this is why it's like the economic multiplier model. This is the dream multiplier model. So I encourage you to let go of any issues you have around sharing. Just drop them and openly share and be transparent and be authentic and whatever else is with the people around you, and you'll create wonders, and you'll go on a journey. So what success looks like for us: decouple food production and distribution from fossil fuels, divorce it from market forces, and collaborate for good. Thanks so much.
That was fantastic, Robert. Thank you so much. Everyone, I hope you find it as insightful and interesting as I did. That was
fantastic.
We have a couple of questions through the chat, Robert, if that's okay.
Let's get my, where is that? Oh. So do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
No, you can leave it on. That's okay.
Yeah, cool.
So do you have any support for farmers that have been affected by any natural disasters, or like bushfire and floods and things? And would you unpack that?
Yep, it's one of those business ideas I had in the early days, but we handed off to a couple of quite a few young people who have. So basically, we were starting to assemble a team because we've had in Brisbane the 2011 floods. Before that, we've had droughts, water inefficiencies. We've had hailstorms up at Stanthorpe. So we would put together teams here in the city, teams of people who would just drive all the way up to Stanthorpe, to help farmers repair fences or repair, hail netting, harvesting teams. So that's now become another social enterprise that a couple of people now do, and they're scaling that up to go national. So that's it. It's one of these things is when you get people to participate, and think of not themselves in terms of who can I go and support, particularly flash flooding. All sorts of magic happens in that 4 or 5 days they're at that farm repairing a fence or, replanting a creek line or even, one case, we had a massive hailstorm hit Stanthorpe one year, and the farmer sent us some photos. We put them on Facebook and said, right, we're going to get 2 20-seater buses and go up there because it's still harvestable, this crop, even though the outer leaves of lettuces were still thrashed. Inside, that iceberg lettuce was still a really good lettuce. And so all of a sudden we had people, going up harvesting all this. We had another farmer one time, his oldest son committed suicide, and that absolutely devastated him. We took over running the farm, or I took over running the farm for about 3 months while they got their shit together. And we just had teams of people harvesting every week. We did all, it was just such an amazing thing to see communities come together to support farmers in these things. And that's why, getting back to that metaphor about it's not up to us to raise a child, it's up to the village. Same thing with where our food comes from. It's up to all of us to support farmers, because at the end of the day, in the current system, they're the ones wearing all the risk, whether it's climate change, whether it's a weather event, which could be linked to climate change, whether it's an economic problem. We're the ones shifting all the risk downstream to them. So we have a big responsibility to collectivise and get out there and take away and de-risk the situation from them. Because when you de-risk the situation from them, you're de-risking society.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robert. Another question I got here, how can we get involved or buy directly here in Sydney? Is there anything happening here around our area?
Yeah, there's a couple. I saw a new one the other day that I didn't know of, but there's one called Ubi, out of our own backyards, like OOOBY, out of our own backyards. Yes, there you go, Ubi. But there's a couple of others down there. I could shoot through. Where was it the other day? I got asked the same question the other day, and Emma shot down a list of all the places in Sydney you can directly buy.
That's fantastic. I particularly loved the dream multiplier term. I think that's really powerful. Thank you, Robert. And the last question I had, so you approached a wicked problem, as you said, which apparently had no solution, and it was deeply rooted. It was too hard to solve. So for students that are approaching social problems of similar complexity, how can they break the elephant into bite-sized chunks and decide where in the system they want to make an intervention? Would you have any words of wisdom for that?
Generally, what I've found, and where the social entrepreneurs that I've mixed with have had the most impact in identifying, well, where is it where I can really strut my stuff is generally I look at I get them to look at their lived experience. What is it that really fires them up? Because being a social entrepreneur is not it's not a walk in the park. So you need to have that lived experience that really impacts on you emotionally. So when you get to those difficult spaces in any business, you'll push through because you've got a reason that's so close to you. So I try to identify with and it's a learning journey. Like for me, I had no idea of social justice. Being an ex-dairy farmer when I first started up Food Connect, and a couple of my staff members were really hard on me one day when I started to buy produce or buy coffee off growers in northern New South Wales. And these were wealthy people who retired from Sydney and gone into coffee plantation as their retirement, niche lifestyle thing. And I got a really good, they gave me a pasting on how this was not aligned at all with what Food Connect was all about. And wasn't I aware of, how the Western world had taken away subsistence agriculture and set up, cash cropping, coffee, cocoa, all these cash crops around the world, and gave me a really good serve. So it's a journey of unpacking where in the wicked problem can I best serve, or can I be of use. So you start where you are with your own lived experience, what really can make an impact, but be open to the lessons you'll learn as you go down the road.
That's really powerful and makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Robert. we have no other questions through the chat, and I think we're up to time. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to mention before we wrap?
No, just to say thank you again to Robert. That was a really informative and inspiring talk, and we really appreciate you taking the time. People who don't know, Robert has been very busy today with interviews with the ABC, I think with Landline, and you'll be able to see him on television very shortly in a couple of different segments, but we will share that information with you once we've clarified. You'll be able to see his story on the ABC. Is that right, Robert?
That's right, yeah. So we're on this morning on ABC Breakfast, and that'll be on as an addendum to Craig Rucastle's Fight the Planet A tonight, and on iView, and then in about a month's time, they say the Landline story will come out, which will be on the shed.
Great.
But I just wanted to respond to, is it Amy Armin? Yes, yeah. I was just going to say our original, this is back in my cheeky days when I started Food Connect, our original strapline was farmers, the real fresh food people. And I got in a bit of trouble from some...
Just so ironic, isn't it? The fresh food people.
Anyway, it's a really important lesson too, because I was pretty angry, and you can still tell I'm still a bit, I still get a bit worked up, which is fine. But my original days of setting up Food Connect was against what the big global agricultural model, and what those original women who got around me and set up Food Connect said, let's lose that strapline and focus on what we want to do. And so that's been probably the biggest lesson is that lived experience gives you great motivation to go against something or other, but at some point in time you have to face around and put the blinkers on and go, okay, I'm going to not pay much attention to that. Apart from when you need to give talks like this, where you need to, talk about what the other system isn't doing. So, but yeah, I thought just an example of that cheeky spirit that wanted to challenge the big guys.
That's awesome. It was such a lesson. Thank you so much, Robert, Sarah. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us. I think that's a wrap. Please connect with the Incubator, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your program.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next time.
Thanks, Robert.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.